Oh, no, I mean, I was going to pay attention now.
Gang's all here.
All right, we're going to convene the resources subcommittee. This is a subcommittee, so we're not going to go through the formal start of the way we start regular meetings. And so tonight's agenda is to have we have Dr. McKibben here, who's going to be giving us our options for redistricting.
Oh, it is.
Thank you, Christy.
Hey, the fancy board's working.
Especially with the delay, that's awesome.
Okay, but we're going to forge on.
Yeah, okay.
I believe that Dr. Crowley has a slideshow that we're going to start with. I'm going to start with a little background on how we came to this point, and I'm going to build up from there. So if Dr. Crowley can start the slideshow. Just because we have been hearing from people that didn't know that we were starting to think about redistricting, so I'm just going to repeat again the history briefly about how we got to this point. So again, this is the Redistricting Resource Subcommittee, dedicated slowly to the discussion of redistricting. And again, we have been looking at space issues in the Woburn Public Schools since 2019. Before then, but in 2019, we commissioned a study by NESDEC to predict Woburn Public Schools enrollment in the next 10 years. Surprisingly, NESDEC predicted that there was going to be declining enrollment in the Woburn Public Schools, and that by 24-25, we would be seeing a number of 4,100. That is not the case. We are over that by quite a bit. I think we're at 4351.
45.
Yeah, we're close to 46, right?
45.
Yeah.
Okay.
Almost 45.
Okay. Thank you, Courtney. And then, of course, during COVID, there was a moratorium on evictions, and so there was very little movement for families, and our enrollment went down. And then, of course, in September of 2020 to April of 2021, we were in the hybrid format, which obviously brought the space down in our schools. And then after COVID-19, there was a huge increase of mobility for families, and we have been seeing a steady increase from 2022 to now. We have had at least 500 children enroll in Woburn Public Schools, and about 350 have remained as students. So that's where we are. In 2021, we formed a space study, which I've been calling the Space Task Force, where we looked specifically at new building in the community with the commissioner of the building committee, the building inspector for the city of Woburn. That's where we did our first actual minor redistrict back then, because there was a bubble of students that were supposed to go to the Alta Vista, and we redistricted them to the Goodyear School. So that was our first action that we took to really address this problem. And we commissioned the feasibility study in 2022, and this was expanded to look at space and enrollment in terms of building a new building. In 2023, we saw a surprising change in enrollment and directly its impact on the Pearl of Wyman. And then in October of 2023, we received the results of the feasibility study, and really since then we have taken steady action on both fronts of addressing the decision on new buildings and also the space issues that have been impacting our schools this school year. This is riveting. As of course, we've taken much more action since then, but of course in November of 2023, that's where we started talking about the space issues that we might see throughout the school year. In December of 2023, that's when we formally looked at the results of the feasibility study. In January of 2024 was really the first committee full discussion on the space issues in the schools. In February of 2024, we took on a direct resources subcommittee to address it, and I think it was that meeting where principals came and told us the various things that were happening inside the buildings, which we then brought to the school committee meeting, and then in March of 2024, we brought it to the Buildings and Capital Planning Committee. So all of this to say that this has been a ongoing, multifaceted issue that we have been addressing for quite some time. And now I'll turn it down to Dr. Crowley, who will talk about how we operationalized the space issues at this point.
I forget the exact date, but at a school committee meeting, one of these meetings, the school committee voted to ask us to pursue options relative to redistricting, which we did, and so that's what I'm going to speak to. We did wind up, as we've talked about, with a consultant who will be speaking momentarily, but the parameters that we kind of gave to the consultant, really we're trying to drive towards equity in the Woburn Public Schools so that all students get an equitable, fair, and great education regardless of what school they attend. And equity means a lot of different things, but it really means getting people what they need. And so demographics plays a factor in that, and class size plays a factor. There's more factors, but those were the two drivers as it relates to equity. We have a robust special ed program in the Woburn Public Schools. It is not at every elementary school, so some schools, such as the Goodyear, as an example, have an assessment center and the GAIN program. It's also grown. So again, as an example, the preschool has grown from the Shamrock to the Reeves. The RISE 2 program outgrew the Shamrock and was moved to the Harold Wyman. So as the special ed programming and number of students increases, so too do the needs. And so that is a factor in this process. One of the things, again, learning in real time, is when you redistrict, you should really be redistricting looking at a 10-year window. So the last time the Woburn Public Schools redistricted, I believe, was 1989.
You saw 1990.
In the 1980s. And so you really should be doing this every 10 to 12 years. Dr. McKibben will speak to this, or at least looking at it to sustain for that amount of time. And so a lot has changed in the Woburn, the city, since 1989. We had a conversation with the leadership team earlier. They talked about the fact that in the late 1980s, Commerce Way really almost didn't exist. The number of special ed programming really didn't exist. The number of EL, ML students really didn't exist. And so the schools are a whole lot different than they were even 5 years ago, but never mind in the 1980s. And so in considering the sustainability and the choices, we can't pick up and move schools. So part of what Dr. McKibben will speak to are some of the rationale for the scenarios presented. We also, and Ms. Crowley mentioned the feasibility study that was commissioned. We did, that study looked at all 11 buildings, and Dave Dunkley talks about the new Reeves, which is 23 years old, the new high school. Like, there's need all across the district. Donna Danisco from Danisco Design came and presented. I think that was in December, the findings. And that feasibility study was also shared with Dr. McKibben. In the feasibility study, one of the options there's currently 7 elementary schools. The feasibility study suggests you can have 7 or you could have 6. So you'll see that reflected in some of the options that Dr. McKibben will go through this evening. And so nobody wants to hear me, I know that. Dr. McKibben is here tonight. He's got a PowerPoint presentation to walk through the different scenarios to the school committee. He's here from South Carolina. He has a PhD from Bowling Green University. He has done this both in Massachusetts and around the United States. He did say that this might be his last trip to Massachusetts, a little cold. But anyway, without further ado, I'll have you go, Dr. McKibben. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Crowley. And just for the record, nobody wants to hear me speak either. So, be that kind of a crowd. I see that right now. Okay. Thank you all for coming today. As Dr. Matt said, I'm Dr. Jerry McKibben. Don't let Rock Hill, South Carolina fool you. You'll notice I do not have a southern accent. I lived in Gardner, Massachusetts for 6 years. My wife taught at Fitchburg. I taught Eastern Connecticut. Interesting thing, I lived here for 6 years, never did a Massachusetts project. Left 20 years ago, I've done 55 since. So, no man's a prophet in his own land. We work with Cropper GIS Consulting out of Delaware, Ohio. We've worked together for 20 years. They're the GIS specialists. They've done all the mapping. I think you'll find in your report there the maps are the highest quality. On the demographic side, he's the GIS side, okay? And working with the information, the parameters from the Woburn Public Schools. Next, please. Okay. Started in March of 24. And just for the record, when you're drawing boundaries for school district, and as Matt said, we've done several hundred across the country in the last 2-3 decades. It usually takes anywhere between a month and 4 months to draw the boundaries. And it depends on numbers of schools, the parameters, we can move programs or not, opening or closing a school. There's a lot of variables that you have to consider, but it's usually a 1 to 4 month process to draw boundaries. And one scenario, 3, 5, whatever the case may be, 8, 10. Assess the utilization, limit 10 arrangements, demographics, feeder patterns, deliver a set of feasible scenarios to the district, balance utilization, adequate room for special programs, each facilities, eliminate satellite areas, provide cohesive feeder patterns, and all this. These are the parameters, and I'm going to hit on this point very, very hard. People will always focus on 1 or 2 variables when you look at for redistricting. There's usually about 7 or 8 you have to look at, and it's a give and take, which what you're doing here is you're trying to find the most utilitarian scenario, maximum amount of benefit, least amount of detriment to people. There is no such thing as a perfect boundary. I can tell you this right now. If you wanted a boundary that 100% of the people agree upon, you'll be here forever, okay? I've always said that my goal is I want people to look at a map going, well, it's not exactly what I want, but I can live with it. If that's it, fine. But if you're looking for 100% approval of the map from everybody in your school district, you're not going to get it. Okay? There's going to have to be, there'll be people out there that find something about they don't like. Okay? So again, you're a very utilitarian approach to this. Next slide, please. Okay. Consultants have gone through me, Matt Cropper, all of our experience and all that. Facilitate the engagements, doing the people heal studies. I also do population enrollment forecasting, do that for the district tied into. So we did look at all the demographic characteristics, not only at the district level, but your current attendance area level. Fascinating district. I think the one statistic I think will jump out and shock people, only 25% of the households in the district have under 18 population. Okay. A little below averaging for Massachusetts. Nationwide, it's about 33%. Massachusetts is about 30%. You're about 25, 26. But we look at all these factors going in. Next slide. Okay. Have a statistical handout in front of you today, which covers the current enrollment and utilization patterns, special program placement, options of estimated enrollment, utilization impacts, and feeder patterns. And I believe the next slide goes through our big 8. No, it doesn't. Okay. Anyway, what we're going to try here is line up all of the variables that we're going to look at here. We want to be mindful of transportation patterns. We don't want to split feeders. Utilization. One of the challenges here for Woburn is the placement of what we call non-traditional programs. And it's a very important factor because class size for non-traditional programs tends to be very different than the general population and much smaller. So where you put those programs has a very large impact on what the utilization of that building is going to be. And this is becoming a more and more important issue across the United States. Started out here in New England, where it had much more what I call robust educational policy than other parts of the country. We're trying to address the needs of all your students. Now you're starting to see it more in the Midwest and South as well. But it becomes a challenge for planning, because you'll have a building that was, quote, built for 500 students 40 years ago, but due to the changes in classroom sizes and the need for what we call non-traditional programs, that building may only be able to hold 420 now. So literally we've been seeing buildings shrink in the United States for the last 40 years as these programs have expanded. And you're trying to address this in this process, so that's a very, very key issue, and you'll see more on that later. Next slide. This is your current utilization, your head count by grade, okay? One of the, and I now wish I'd put that demographic variable in this thing. One of the variables I always look at right off the bat when I pull for an area, a district and its attendance areas, what's the individual cohort size, okay? Notice your 383, this big first grade cohort, almost 30 students bigger than the second grade cohort. People, oh my God, it's growth, people moving in. It's not. If you pull the 2020 census data, your 2-3-year-olds in the 2020 census, that cohort is about 45 students bigger than the one before and drops off right after that. That's one thing we always do in demography is we want to make sure if it's growth, it's due to growth, correlate to that, and not due to what's called cohort changes. And that's the factor right here. That's probably one reason why NESDEC got it wrong so bad. They weren't looking at cohort sizes. This is actual cohort for the district, total for each building. You average about 74.6% utilization at the current distribution, a high of 81 at Herb, and a low of 69 at Alta Vista. Out of the district. In the middle school, a little tighter. Thank you very much. 93.5%, 100% at Kennedy, 87 at Joyce. Much less running room here, and you'll find this to be an issue here. We try to draw the middle school boundaries. Right now, you've got 3 elementary split by the middle schools. We're trying to drop it to 2 or 1. Couldn't do it straight up. The size and balance is there. So even though they're the same capacity, because we don't, if you are going to split an elementary, you're going to want to split it 50-50 and not 90-10, something like that. So basically, this is our starting point, okay? So from this point, we start applying the parameters of the district and what they're trying to accomplish through this. And I believe that might be the next slide. Yes, it is. Efficient use of capacity and classroom allocations. This traditionally is the #1 variable, the focus of people when they're doing redistricting. Matt made a great point. You build a building, you're stuck with it there for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, okay? Your facilities are static. They don't move, you don't expand them. But the distribution of your students in the district is always moving. That's why you have to look at every 10, 12, 15 years. Because not only is the composition different, the distribution is different. So when districts are going to redistrict, first thing they're trying to do is rebalance the distribution of their students, the distribution of their buildings, okay? Maintain or increase diversity. Now, diversity could be race and ethnic, it could be socioeconomic, it could be by program, it could be by grade level. There's a whole bunch of issues there. Don't split neighborhoods and eliminate satellite zones. You've got a big one for Goodyear right now that's sitting out there. Most districts, if for no other reason, transportation and the neighborhoods like to have contiguous districts. But you don't want to split neighborhoods, you know. Use natural boundaries, things like that. We like to use a lot of rivers and railroads, things like that. Transportation.
I'm sorry, Jerry, this is a clarifying question, if I might, not a real question. When you say satellite zone, you mean kids living far away from the school? Just
Attendance, part of the attendance area that is not geographically contiguous
Okay.
to that area.
Okay,
It's referred
I'm
to
sorry to
as
interrupt, I just
satellite.
wanted to
That's all
make
right,
sure,
yeah.
clarified that.
I get into geo speak sometimes. Okay.
No, it's fine, thank you.
Transportation, and boy, is that an issue around here, the way people drive in this town. You know, you don't want kids on a long bus route, 'cause they may be on it for days, you know, so. And pedestrian patterns, since they do tend to cross the street wherever they want to, you know. Traffic lights be damned. Minimize, this is, I think, a key one, minimize the number of times an individual student is reassigned to the school. That's another reason why we shoot. Number one goal for me when I'm doing this, despite the rest of us, don't come back and have to do this 5 years from now. That is the number one thing. 10, I shoot for 15 personally. That gets you one entire cohort all the way through pre-K through 12. Only got to change once. You should expect to live through a redistricting once in your academic career, but you should never have to do it twice. Okay. Long-term enrollment capacity trends, future capital. We didn't do a forecast for this, but I am mindful of the demographic trends in the area. We did a full analysis of all the attendance areas' demographic characteristics. Housing, family structure, housing tenure, age structure was the big one. We put that in there. Mindful locations of feeder schools and boundaries. Try to make it as continuous as we could, elementaries to middle, fewest split as possible. And use geographic features such as railroads, creeks, major highways. That kind of ties into that, not splitting subdivisions. Those and others. On top of that here was trying to get program distribution balanced, okay? Now, I'll say this again because it's more important. There's give and take here. You can't focus on one and ignore the other. Also be mindful that, well, I have trouble with transportation here, but my transportation fix might goof up my capacity numbers, okay? You really need to be thinking about this multidimensionally. And by multidimensionally, I'm talking like 8, 10, 12 dimensions at one time. That's where it gets a little complex. And you got to be able to compromise, okay? Again, you're trying to find highest amount of utility, most utilitarian boundaries you can get, okay? Next slide. K-5 options, program placement, building capacity. These are the 5 scenarios, and these are the parameters, and this kind of sets the tone right there. What each school's, you know, here's the current, what's there in each option, and what changes. Okay, this is a good snapshot. This is why each scenario looks different. It's because the building programs there are different. That's why you've got all these different capacity numbers here. It depends not so much on the size of the building and the number of rooms, but what programs are there, what children are being educated. That's the key variable here, okay? And that's what's making this a little more challenging than normal. Now, the other thing is option 1 and 2 has Lynn Scott still open, okay? Options 3, 4, and 5 close Lynn Scott. And the logic behind this, of course, is the pre-K center. So when you're going through your decision-making process, that's your number one decision, okay? That will set the tone. If you decide to close Lynn Scott and have a pre-K center, just toss option 1 and 2 aside. If you decide to keep Lynn Scott open and not have a pre-K center, toss option 3, 4, and 5 away. So we're looking at both at the same time to try to give the district maximum number of options to look at, different scenarios, so to speak. Okay? And again, with different capacities and different programs. So you really are getting 10, 12, 14 different variables in it. Next slide. Okay. This is your current elementary zones as they are right now. Okay. That thing there is a satellite. Okay. This thing here is almost a satellite. It's just barely connected to, we call this the isthmus. Okay. We wanted to get rid of that, was one of the big things, and kind of make this a little bit more contiguous, mindful of transportation. So this is our starting point. Next slide. This is option 1, okay? Now, we keep the boundaries in black. These are always your current, okay? So when you see, like in this area, here's a large herd going down to reeds, okay? It's now becomes purple. So this area moves from herd to reeds. This area moves from Shamrock to Goodyear. This area moves from Goodyear to Shamrock. And this goes up to Malcolm White, yeah, okay. Still got that isthmus there, but it gets rid of the satellite, okay? And it keeps Linscott open. Next slide. This is option 2, also with Linscott open. Kind of going the other way, taking territory out of Reeves into herd. Gets rid of the satellite by bringing it all into Shamrock. Malcolm White expands. And I believe this one has one of the lowest number of kids being transferred, which is probably the strength of this. It's not as strong on other variables, but this is the one that, you know, when you're focusing on moving the fewest number of kids, is beneficial. Next slide. Option 3, well, this one is closing Linscott. So you see Reeves here. Now, we put this in as an option. Personally, I don't like 3 because you got to leave the district to get around to Reeves here. That just doesn't seem like a real good idea. And that road, I don't want to go down that road, y'all. Gets put into Shamrock. Goodyear stays the same. See some territory coming into to White and some into Alta Vista. Number 4, I believe, is the next slide. The exclave and the southern part of Shamrock goes over to Goodyear. Shamrock picks up the southern part of White. This whole area comes down to Reeves. And Alta Vista picks up this little area up here. And there's some change at this. This actually has quite a few kids at this small area here just south of 95. And last but not least, option 5, pretty close, but not quite as clean a boundaries as we saw in 4, but the utilizations, I think, tend to be a little bit more close. So those are the 5 options that we've come for the elementary at this point, okay? Again, 1 and 2 is keeping Linscott open. 3, 4, and 5 is closing Linscott. Next slide. These are the estimated enrollments and utilizations for the, here's your starting point. Here's option 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, okay? And you see here Linscott closed in these 3 options and still open in these 2 options. So you can see here, and the utilizations will vary, again, primarily because it's where you put the program, okay? If you're putting English second language, special education, whatever the program might be, it depends on what the maximum classroom size could be for that program in there. If they're spread across the district, it's going to have one impact. If they're concentrated in certain elementaries, it's going to have another impact. So, but you always, somewhere around 79%, this one gets 84%, trying to keep them as often as possible. Now, you really don't want an elementary school going above 90% if possible. And the reason for that is, and anybody who's run a school knows, you can't have a kid in every seat in every classroom all day long. You know, ebbs and flows. You can have different cohort sizes coming through, like you've got in that first grade right now. Sometimes you may have to go from a fourth section or down to a third, things like that. So you need to have at least one, preferably two classrooms that are there extra that's be needed for, you know, a bubble going through, program 1 year, something special going on. You get above 90%, you have trailers out back. 100%, you definitely have trailers out back. So we tend to shoot for that number there, something in the 80s. If you're in the 80s, that's a good thing. Now, these trends will ebb and flow as we go through the decade too. Okay, we've had births dropping in this country for 15 years, and it's just going to get a little dipsy-do during COVID, but that's now past us. So still declining birth cohorts coming in. Woburn doesn't have enough births to maintain their enrollment, okay? Not with their out-migration flow. So you need some in-migration flow to keep those cohorts big enough size. Of the 1 and 2, you can see here where the utilizations for option 1, very, very close to that 80%. Very equitable distribution here. Not quite so much, not too bad on option 2. Of the ones where Linscott is closed, still all pretty good. Probably 5 is probably the best one, okay? And I'm speaking from a demographic point of view. There might be some other considerations that the board, the district may want to look at that would tweak or change or all that, or some kind of variation. But from a demographic point of view, and given the parameters we have, 1 in 5 probably lasts you 10 to 15 years. Okay. Now we'll get the job done for what you want done. Well, that's for discussion. I think that's what the committee is going to have to sit down and have a hard discussion about. But the way we've drawn these right now, those are probably your best 2. Next slide. Elementary school options by enrollment by grade. Okay, you can see each one of these, you've got that large bubble in the first grade, and kind of dropping off. So, but you'll notice that Reeves kind of has a bit of a bubble, but Alta Vista does not. So part of that's also interdistrict transfers as well, which is another factor. But this is what your grades would look like right now, given each one of the scenarios, okay, and how they'll be distributed across there. So you see some variations in Goodyear in option 5, not so much in option 1, and not so much in option 3. Again, you have a lot of variables at work here. There's give and take, push and pull, if you like, as we say in demography. Short-term benefit, long-term gain, short-term benefit, long-term disaster. You really got to pick and choose your poison here, so to speak. Next slide.
Jerry, I'm just confirming, so the 5 column there is the group that's going to the middle school. So they're really, the 5 column on this chart is they're going to be next year's 6th graders.
That's next year's 6th graders.
Yeah.
That's next year's 1st graders.
Great, thank you.
Right. Elementary options demographics, okay, stay pretty consistent, okay. District is 11% black, 72% white, 7% Asian, about 9% other. Other, according to the Census Bureau and Office of Management budget, the majority of that's multiracial, okay. That and Asian will continue to be going up over the next 10 years. Those are our 2 fastest growing race and ethnic types, not only in the Commonwealth here in Massachusetts, but across the country. Both these 2 went up in large numbers. Hispanic is not a racial group, it's an ethnic group. That's going to change in the 2030 census. I don't know if that came out. They just announced it, maybe earlier this month. They're going to make Hispanic a race. They're also going to make Middle Eastern North Africa a race too, so it's really going to get interesting next census. So I know I need to get out more often. But basically, it doesn't change the race ethnic makeup that much from the current. And part of the, and here's where that give and take comes in place. When you start trying to balance by race and ethnic, and all by socioeconomic also, you tend to move more kids. So what are you going to give? Move as few kids as possible or achieve more race and ethnic balance? None of your areas are more than 15% off of the district average, and that's the parameters set by the Department of Justice on this. We do a lot of redistricting case. Matt does a lot of work with the DOJ, so kind of mindful of that. Next slide. Free reduced lunch percentages. District is basically 60-40, yes to no. Again, this distribution doesn't change that much. And again, virtually every area is within that 15% band of the district average, which goes with DOJ directives on that one. So pretty good on that. Doesn't change it that much. Next slide. Impact, okay? And this is, you know, option one. Of course, 3, 4, and 5 are big because you close the school. Everybody's impacted there. So roughly the same here for 3, 4, and 5, roughly the same for 1 and 2. Same parameters. So close school, you affect a lot of kids because you close an elementary school. If you don't close it, you're affecting 200. That's pretty clean and simple. Here's who they are and where they're going, okay? And listed by school, by scenario, okay? So here, how many are staying Alta Vista, stay in their schools, going from Goodyear to Malcolm White's 51, Goodyear to Shamrock is 31, you know, so it tells you who's going to stay put and who's going to move by scenario. So again, the geocoding is very, very helpful for this. That's why it's such a useful tool here. Next slide. Middle schools. This gave us some heartburn. One reason was 93% utilization right off the bat. That's the bad news. So we have much tighter parameters to deal with here than with the elementaries, which is running about a little below 80. The good news is you got smaller cohorts coming in, so as you go through the decade, your imbalance in the middle schools is going to dissipate because the areas that have high number middle school now are also the ones that are going to be empty nesting as we go forward. And we tend to think of empty nesting as when the last child leaves high school. You need to expand that definition. You could be empty nest of preschoolers in elementary, preschool, elementary, and middle school. You have a lot of housing units in the district that have school-age kids in it, yeah, but they're all middle school and high schoolers. Don't have any elementary, aren't going to have any preschoolers, and they're sure not going to have any more kids because they're in their 40s and 50s. So the whole empty nesting scenario is not just a point in time, it's actually continuous over a decade. And those areas that are being empty nesting will be affecting that. But this is the current boundaries, and then we go through the scenarios, trying to split as few elementaries as possible. In option 1, removing this area from Joyce into Kennedy, that from Kennedy into Joyce. Most of that's trying to keep the splits down between the elementary, going to middle, 2 splits. Next one is option 2. Got some coming out of Joyce into Kennedy right here. Again, trying to keep it down to just 2 splits. Option 3, this area goes from into Joyce and Kennedy. Strength of this option is it only splits 1 elementary school. In option 4, very small modifications there, and again, only splits 1 elementary school. Option 1, 2, 3 for the elementaries feed directly into option 1, 2, and 3 for the middle school. Option 4 and 5 on the elementary are this one. They're both the same. We didn't have to make any modifications when the one district split. Next slide. Utilization currently 100% 87. So 97, 97, 95, and 91, and then 101 here. So again, this will dissipate over time because the areas are feeding into Kennedy. It has a lot of empty nesting in it. So it's going to see, that will drop back down. Most of your decline middle school students in the next 10 years will be in Kennedy, not in Joyce. Okay? It's already happened in Joyce. You're only 8 off right here now with 101%. But again here, since you're running at 93% capacity currently, that's pretty tight parameter. You're already above the 90% line. So you just have to let them age out, okay? And program placement here will be very key. Next slide. Middle school options estimated enrollment by grade. Currently it's right now. You can see, like in Joyce grade, 180 going out this year, 137 in your 6th grade. There's a lot of variations. These differences in cohort sizes, much bigger impact in the middle school than you have in the elementary. Of course, even bigger when you get to the high school because they're all in one place. So they don't smooth each other out. They sometimes amplify themselves. And you see that's the case here in a lot of these scenarios. Option 4, Joyce, 173 going out, 129 coming in. There can be some pretty big cohort changes here. It happens naturally. There is no such thing as linear birth or linear grade rates, or you're going to have ebb and flow going over time. Long-term trend, if you do a smoothing average, might be going down or up, but you're always going to have that year-to-year variation. Next slide. The demographics, they came out pretty well on this. It's still pretty much a nice even split. We don't see anything that's really, any kind of violation, not only within the free reduced or the race and ethnic. Forget the 15%. Most are within 5%. So your middle schools are pretty good shape right now on this level. Next slide. And then the options impact, 53, 23, 62, and 32. Those numbers stay low because you're just moving kids around, you're not closing anything, so the numbers have your minimal impact on it. So this is actually kind of the easy side of the equation. Next slide. And then who's going to where? Also, this still goes to Kennedy. You just go through all the different options and see who's going where. And you see most of them are still split. When you're going to split an elementary school, you want to try to get as close to 50-50 as possible because you're losing half your friends, or I like to say you're losing half of your enemies, whatever the case may be. And you don't want 10% because there would be an isolated cohort going on in the middle school. You have very few friends you've gone to school with for 5 years. So 50-50 is the optimum if you have to split it. Next slide. Questions. And I did that in 35 minutes.
Yeah,
That's pretty good for me.
Okay, so does the committee have any questions? I'll start with the members of the resources subcommittee. Jesse or Mike?
Sure, I had a question on the timeline in terms of making this work for 10 to 15 years. How would that work as we're also looking at building new buildings? How would if we're looking at a plan for 10 to 15 years, but we're also looking at building new buildings, combining buildings, things of that nature with our building committee, how does that work?
Oh, you mean like new home construction?
New schools,
I'm glad
yeah.
you brought that up. That's a very important
No, new
part.
schools.
Oh, not new homes.
Matt
new
had
schools.
mentioned that also. Disregarded. 90 to 95% of your housing market is existing home sales. 5 to 10% is new home construction. You could build 500 new homes a year in Woburn. You haven't done that half a century. If you don't sell any existing homes, your enrollment drops. It's going to be the pace and the magnitude of your over 65, over 70 householders turning over areas, neighborhoods you haven't seen kids come out of for 30, 40 years. When they sell, they're going to sell it to a new young family with kids, and that's going to move in. That's the real driver. That's why we've got this housing problem in the U.S. right now. The elderly stopped moving during COVID. So I say, is there a realtor in the house? Never one when you need one, you know? So they'll tell you, the supply of homes in the market right now is a 30, 40-year low. The builders, seeing the opportunity, got everything in the pipeline, they're trying to push it through right now. But there's no way that 10% of the housing market can fill up that shortfall 90%. Now, I built a house in Gardner. I know it takes an act of God to get something built in the Commonwealth, okay? South, they'll put a 400, unit subdivision in 2 years, environment be damned, it's different up here. So what you need to be looking at is Zillow, RealtyTrack, and Realtor.com, how many homes are going on the market. Right now, you've got an increasingly large wave of homeowners that are now currently in their late 50s, early 60s, that will start putting their homes on the market later in the decade, in the 30s. It's not retirement that triggers downsizing. It's either the death of one of the spouses or they both lose the ability to drive. There's a joke there, but I won't say it. When that happens, they can't maintain lifestyle, can't maintain the house, all that. Then they put it on the market. People talk about, well, I'm going to sell my house up here and move down to the Carolinas or Florida or Texas, whatever. Don't do that. They don't want you down there anyway. So, but that's only about 15% of the outlays. Usually people between the ages 62 and 70 tend to be the healthy, the wealthy, and still two-person households. Most aging in place takes place over 70, the downsizing. And the problem is we've never built elder housing in this country. We just ignored it. We work with Andover. They built a real nice complex up there for elder housing. It's about 125 units, so the elderly could downsize and stay in their home, their town. They all loved it, all that. Problem is, there's such a shortage of it. 80% of the people that moved into it aren't from Andover. They're from all over the place. So it didn't really help them themselves. It was good for that, but that's what's needed is elder housing. Mm-hmm. That would probably have more of an impact on your enrollment than single-family attached homes or condos or apartments or things like that.
Yeah, I also actually read an article in the Globe, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks back, and it was about the mass exodus of people ages, it's like 35 to 45, something like that, leaving the state of Massachusetts in general because of housing, not being able to find it. I don't know.
That's the excuse du jour, but they've been doing that for 50 years, and there's a bigger problem. There's more jobs available in the South and the West and all that. Mm-hmm. We in the Midwest, where I grew up, suffered through that for 30 years of deindustrialization. Now they're starting to come back a little bit because it's actually now cheaper living in the Midwest than it is in the South. It's still cheaper than Massachusetts to go south, but it's not like it was where, 20 years ago when we left, we sold our house here, we paid cash in South Carolina and money left over, because it was so much cheaper. Those days are gone. And many parts of we call the desirable South, along the coast, down in Florida and all that, you'll pay almost as much for the same house down there as you sell for up here. Mm-hmm. It's getting pretty bad, particularly the last couple of years with the prices going up so much.
Yeah, I have family in the Midwest. I'm from the Midwest, so yeah, familiar with the prices there. I did have a question too in regards to the schools that we're looking at building. So we're potentially looking at building new schools, combining schools. The feasibility study that was shared with you. Was that shared with you, Dr. McKibben?
I didn't get any of that. You have to yell at me.
The feasibility.
Oh, sorry, the
feasibility.
feasibility study?
The Linscott-
Feasibility study.
Yes.
The Linscott Rumford
Yeah.
and the Alta
Alta
Vista
Vista.
being merged, or the
Right.
Middle school.
the
Yeah.
middle schools being
Yeah.
merged.
That's used to set the parameters, okay? That kind of what brought the issue to a head, We weren't involved in it at all. It's basically the results of it's what we have to deal with, and that's where we came up with these different parameters. Well, the district did, we did, but, okay, and of course the big one is you want a pre-K center or not?
Right.
Where are you going to put it? Where you can put your programs? You know, it's these feasibility, and we're seeing this in a lot of districts too, where this is kind of forcing the hand, you know, of what are you going to do about this? Because as Matt said, it's not static. You know, you've got changes, you get distribution, you got you know, where your students are at, where your programs are at, you know, and right size them to the buildings given where they're at right now. I think it was the feasibility study that came up that said that Linscott was the best place for it, right?
It said,
Your
It
pre-K
said-
center.
well, it didn't say that it was the best place for the early childhood center. It said that it was feasible to come offline.
Right. And that's real popular right now. There's literally hundreds across the country. Pre-K is the new big thing. 2 decades ago, believe it or not, it was all-day kindergarten. And now they're going to pre-K centers, you know, and early childhood centers, things like that, kind of going backwards down, like the age 2 almost. Well, the facility requirements for that is completely different than elementary school. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, not to mention the staffing considerations on it as well. So,
Okay, thanks.
Who else has questions? Mike, do you have any questions?
It's more of a few questions and a few comments, but we'll start with, and not through your position, Ms. Crowley, but more towards the leadership, the chairman and the administration. We've heard the presentation this evening. We've received numerous emails regarding different aspects of what's going on. I'm just curious as to who and when will those emails be addressed and kind of the timeline of what is next. Now that we have a little bit of information, there's a lot of the questions that came up regarding the redistricting were pinpointed to a lot of the schools that came up tonight. So hopefully, I don't know who it's going to go to, but the emails were addressed and forwarded to us, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to make sure that those voices are heard. That's point number one.
Well,
Is
let's
what-
answer that. So
Okay.
I guess the question from Mike is, what are we, like, how is the public going to really be able to respond to these plans?
Right.
And I think Andrew has an answer.
So, I mean, I think sort of a couple questions there. So the first is the questions that have already come in from the public, and how are we addressing those? In part, we're addressing those through this
Tonight, right.
presentation, through some of the answers to the larger questions that have been percolating through in terms of, you know, things like middle school splits, things like, you know, just simple, where are my children going to go? These options address a lot of those questions. Some of the more operational questions, those are things that we may have to look at as we move towards a decision. Right? To the point about how the public can respond to this presentation, we are talking about an additional forum for the public to ask questions, to bring comments forward. Certainly in the interim, my email is open, and I will respond, and I will send any communication I receive out to the public. We are trying to be as communicative as possible in this process, and that's going to continue as we move forward towards a decision over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Andrew.
I don't know if
Okay.
that fully
Mike,
addresses your
continue.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the emails are received, that, you know, someone will be going through those, and, you know, the points that people made will get, if they didn't catch this presentation tonight, someone look through them again and say, this is the answer to your concern or your questions got answered.
And I should say also, we will make this presentation public as soon as possible.
All right.
and if I may add, sir, this is a lot of data
Yeah.
to absorb at one time. I wouldn't expect anybody, you know, that has been doing this for 40 years, oh, yeah, this all makes sense to me like that. It's going to take a while to sift through this. And again, this is not something to be taken lightly. I mean, you're going to have to get, what do we want? What are we willing to give up for it? What's most important and all that? The doing nothing's not an option. How you want to move forward is a big option, and how you want to do that, okay? And I think go back to the key. You want a pre-K center, okay? That's question number one. Once you've answered that question, your path becomes much clearer. You kind of cut your work in half. But you still have a lot of variables there. You're going to have to balance pros and cons, good and bad, things like that. So this is something that's going to need to be digested over, you know, at least a week or so, just to kind of get your head around it. Not only for the for the committee, but for the public as well. This is all going up on your website, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, just get on there, look at this, and I can guarantee you, my report will cure any case of insomnia you ever had in your life, so. God, you people have no sense of humor.
I like it.
You're killing
There was a
no
giggle.
New England stereotypes here, I'll tell you that.
I object.
See, my problem is I find this really fascinating, so it would actually.
Yeah, like a bunch of Yankees fans.
Whoa.
That would not,
Come on now.
there you go.
Now you're gonna get a reaction.
Then you'll get something.
So, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Again, it's going to be out publicly. I don't know that through Ms. Crowley to the chairperson as far as, again, an opportunity. There's no public comment this evening. When will that come out? That'll come out after tonight's meeting to when they can, have you sit down with the public, give a little bit of feedback, give a little input on the doctor's presentation tonight. And you're right, doctor, you said, the pre-K is the pre-K or it isn't. So you start with 5 options. The pre-K is open or closed, and now you're down to 2 options, which
Right.
I
Or
get
3.
that, or 3. And again, this evening, we have to recognize the mayor's in attendance tonight, as well as Councilor Viola, and, when will they, again, just seeing it tonight, they're trying to wrap their head around it as well and give some input. The number 2 option, I have the note of less kids moving. I think, to me, that makes a lot of sense. Again, there's a little page on here on what we have on May 8th for enrollment and utilization analysis with a dollar figure. Again, further down the road, there'll be a dollar figure attached to a lot of these, I imagine, through, some other agency. What will be needed, maybe, perhaps, Doctor? I don't know.
Sir, you brought up probably the option I hear the most, and I've done hundreds of these, but I like option 2, moves least number of kids. Good point. Does it get the job done? Does it get the job done? Well, let's only move 40 kids. I heard this back in Indiana about 4 weeks ago doing this. This option only moves 4 kids, or 40 kids from a school. It wouldn't last 2 years.
Just in time to build a new World One, new
You've got
Alka-Vestal
to
Instruct.
have the courage to make the bold move, because again, I reiterate that, whatever your preference and priorities are and all this and what's good done, you do not want to come back and do this 5 years later. Absolutely not. So my advice to not only the committee, but the community, okay? Don't weasel out on this, say, let's just do this a little bit here, a little bit there, a little nitpicking. That's why you have to come back and keep doing this constantly, over and over and over again. And the longer you kick the can down the road, the worse it's going to be when you finally bite the bullet. Okay? So your point's well taken, sir, but don't get caught up in that, because it's the road to woe.
Okay,
It really is.
It was a comment that you made looking through all 5 options, so I just wanted to, I'm not highlighting any of it, just a comment to come up. Again, the money factor of it all to make this happen. I know there's transportation costs involved. There's other factors that will come up. We don't know that this evening. You talk about putting the Linscott into a pre-K center, or perhaps, closing that and making it a pre-K center. Cost effectiveness there. How much would something like that cost? I don't have any clue. That'll come up later. Making it a pre-K. Tonight, we say it this evening, and again, maybe, depending on the upcoming budget, we have the Wyman School, which is still offline. We still, it's an older school, Dr. K. It's just an elementary school that's been sitting and not usable, but it's still a factor that we can, have some money we're putting into that. So again, I'm looking at the options, the finances, and mostly, the people that want to comment. I want to make sure that their answers get out there some way, some shape or form. And you're right, perhaps tonight, they've already been answered, the, dozen or so emails, what about this? Oh, it was presented, the other night by the doctor. Here it is, refer to whatever on the cable TV network, whereby he answered that particular question, whether it be elementary level or middle school. So, and I think for now, Ms. Crowley, that's all I have is my notes unless I can think of something else in the meantime. Thank you.
You'll be able to ask more questions
Oh, good.
if it so moves.
Yeah,
Jesse, did you have more?
I do. I'll probably think of some as they come to. But I was just looking at options 3 and 4 and the capacity level at the Reeves because it's substantially larger than the rest of the district. Have other districts had larger, like a massive elementary school and then smaller elementary schools? Is that a benefit or not a benefit to having such a huge elementary school when the others are like about half the size?
I'm going to punt down. It depends what programs you put in there. Actually, that's I think it's the variable that I think it's going to be most confusing for people and least considered. You know, it's not just the distribution of students, the distribution of programs in there as well, and both are in my opinion, are both equally important in this one. Ambitious, but both equally important. So. And I think after the preschool decision, it's basically deciding where you want these programs, because there could be cost savings on that too. It could be beneficial for the students and for the parents, more efficient, for the teachers, things like that. Again, there's an efficiency factor that you can't overlook. You don't overemphasize it either, but you can't overlook it. So I know that's a weasel answer, but it's the best I can come up with. So
That's fair.
so.
That's all I have for now, but I'll have more.
Okay, any non-members of the resource subcommittee have questions? Ms. Corbett?
Thank you. Can you go back to slide 5? So I'm looking at the current enrollment utilization.
You're going to have to speak up.
Oh, I thought I was. I'm looking at the current enrollment utilization,
Yep.
and I'm seeing the percentage, what's being used now, and I guess it might be more for our folks here, but if the utilization is under 82%, is it the pockets that are making why are we out of room in some schools, basically, is my question?
I can answer a little bit. I think that we've had this conversation about, I guess, enrollment and program placement and number of general education classrooms per building, and I think we've said this for a long time, we have, and you can see, plenty of seats, but it's the way that we're configured that's making it that the seats aren't available in the right places or the number of seats that we need. And so really it's a matter of combination of, and again, with some of them, it's that you have small cohorts of 3, 4, 5, and large cohorts, K1, 2, or vice versa. But it's really kind of how the puzzle goes together.
Can you explain under, right next to the left of the green column, what the plus minus is? What is it, does that, as it applies to the current
It's
utilization?
theoretically how many extra seats you have in that building and all
That
that.
are just empty?
Yeah, and if I could follow up with an example, again, a school that we did in Virginia recently, people talking about the school is packed to the rafters, we have no space left, where kids coming out of our ears, all that good stuff. When we looked at it, did the calculations, you're running at 80% capacity. What in the world's going on here, Well, it turns to find out that each classroom was assigned to a teacher. It was 4 periods a day. They had 1 period off, okay? So here was 25% of the classrooms weren't online because it was a teacher's downtime period and all that. So if they just changed their policy and made, open classrooms had space for teachers like a desk and office and all that, and bring it online, they picked up 25% more space. So administrative policies are actually pretty key here. That's just one extreme example, but quite common in the South and Midwest. So there's a lot of ways you can. I've never talked to a high school or a principal yet that said, I got plenty of space, It's same with redistricting. I've never had a parent say, oh, please move my child, or close my school, or whatever the case may be. So the devil's in the details, as we like to say here, and I think, Courtney, you brought up a couple of good ones right there, so.
Yeah, I think it's 715 empty seats.
So,
Yep. Okay.
theoretically.
Yes.
On to slide 15. What kind of class sizes are we looking at? Class size, based on these numbers, like the estimated enrollment?
So it's very specific by option. We've calculated out and we've measured where the bubble rooms would be in each of the options. I would say that the best, some of the options do better than others. Some do a better job of making sure that it's consistently the same across the board, but ultimately you're dividing the number of students in that grade level by the number of open classrooms. But I think that one of the big things that we will say is that regardless, because of especially the big first grade cohort, there are going to be bubbles that still exist. I think some, again, as you go through and you count, some do better of where they land. I guess for me, I couldn't answer it in full. Right, I'd have to go through each option, each line, and each one right now, which probably is not the best use of everyone's time.
Well, we can probably just divide
Yeah.
by 2 or
Right.
3.
I mean, we
The
can
buildings.
create like an additional document.
We
that
have a cap,
divides.
right?
There was a cap, yes. I mean, we don't get close, and when we counted the bubbles, we did the same threshold as we've always used. Again, some options, I think this is part of it, some options do a better job of keeping everybody around the same numbers than others.
I remember early in my career, I was doing a forecast in a school here. It's perfect here. You got cohort sizes, basically it'll be 60 kids going forward, and the facilities guy says, oh my God, that's horrible. You know, if it was 65 or 66, I could have 3 sections of 22, you know. Now I've got to have 2 sections of 30. So what looked good to me on paper as a demographer, who actually, someone had to actually administer it, it was horrible. You know, so it really depends on what your goal is. It was a pretty valuable lesson I learned then, but you know, it may look good to me, it may not be looking good for someone who's concerned about classroom sizes, or the cost of having to bring another section online, pay another teacher, use another classroom. You know, that starts getting complex here.
I think it's also important to note too that it's going to shift because students in specialized programs are counted in class size numbers, right? And so that also is going to, it's difficult to kind of take this and just divide, right? But and that causes some of the fluctuations.
So if you're adding up class sizes and the school also has a program, it's probably not going to be just a divide by 3, like the Earl Wyman. You would have to, divide by 3, get 21,
Back to this slide.
and then look at the program and see, well, there's probably 12 kids that are placed. at
And we're
sub-separate.
happy to do kind of an additional document for moving
Yeah.
forward. It'd be hard for me to answer it straight by looking at it right now, without talking more than you want to hear.
When you look
I'd
at
love
this
to hear you
column here, think of it as an interval non-zero number. You know,
Yeah.
oh, it's 0, we're perfect. No, that's 100%. You're shooting for 90, okay? So that number, optimally, if all things were equal, if you're just looking at straight classroom size, should be about -210, okay? Because you want 10% running room in there to have some space. You don't want them packed to the rafters. So that's actually should be a non-zero number you're shooting for there, okay? Now, how close you can get to that is going to depend, again, the different classroom sizes of the different special programs, okay? There's the general and the traditional and non-traditional population.
Is there information, I know you mentioned as far as race and ethnicity, did we break out by ethnicity at all as far as Hispanic and non-Hispanic?
No, we didn't. No. I looked that up for the general population, but I don't think we have that in our geocode file.
And one more, for the middle school, and I don't know if this is for you or but would this be, if we were to redistrict the elementary schoolers, could we then just feed that into the middle school, or would we need to redistrict the middle school at the same time?
Same time.
What, would there be, is it possible to do just the elementary school?
Sure.
Can I-
Anything you want to.
I guess is my,
I feel like I think there may
Help
be
me
a difference of interpretation here. I think what Colleen might be asking is
Moving the
it
children.
necessary to redistrict current middle schoolers? So a 7th grader in the Kennedy right now, who is in one of the areas that shifts in here, is it necessary for that child to move under this for some reason? Or is it possible to keep
Talking
your
about
current?
grandfathering?
Yeah, your current middle schoolers, allow them to continue at the middle school and then shift the new population in on the current
Probably
ones.
grandfather, well, this year's seventh graders will be eighth graders next year. Yeah, you grandfather them, let them go one more year. As I always tell school districts, you know, the longer you grandfather, the longer it's going to be before you see the full impact of the forecast. So grandfathering for the last year is pretty traditional. People do that. Some people will push for more than that. Worst I saw for elementaries was grandfather all current students and all preschoolers.
Oh.
You know, it would take 10 years to get through the system. Now it's not going to work. But 1 year, yeah, that's pretty traditional to do that. So
Just because we are not having as much of a need in the elementary, the middle school level, that I would think that moving them elementary right now would be the, and then just feed into.
right.
Thank you.
Could I just add on to that, Lori? Could you do more than 1 year, so like do the 6th, 7th graders both, and then just start with the incoming 5th graders?
You can do that. You don't want to do that.
Okay,
It's real messy after 1 year.
okay.
Pat?
Do you think that would work for the fifth graders, the current fourth graders being fifth graders next year at the
We'd see
elementary?
that
Would
in
that be?
elementary level too,
Yeah.
yes, they could. But again, 1 year.
Right.
Kind of a transition year.
Would it work in all of the scenarios you presented, do you think? Or did you look at it, if it would work on all the scenarios?
Oh,
Or-
yeah, it'll work in all scenarios. You can do, again, it's challenging, it's a little messy that first year. That's the other reason why I say just do it for 1 year. This year's rising fifth graders and rising seventh graders, and that's it. Okay.
The only consideration I would say is that in options 3, 4, and 5, you're sending all fifth graders for one school to be redistricted.
Right.
So
You're
they
closing
wouldn't
the
have,
school
there'd
there,
be
so
a
you're-
building that wouldn't have an option to grandfather. So if you're going to make the consideration, I would just consider if you're going to do it, that would be for everyone. But you'd want to decide if you would want to do it, if you're going to do it, option 3, 4, 5, whether you should just have it. be
Yeah,
on
1 and 2 is pretty easy.
Yes,
3, 4, and 5, going to close the school, well, you got a whole bunch of kids there, they're going to have to move.
yes.
You know, they're changing schools.
Yeah, I have a real hard time with 3, 4, and 5 anyway, because we have, our North Woburn schools are the only schools that do not have a brand-new school. I mean, yes, the clap at the south end was lost, and those kids went between 2 schools and were split. But North Woburn has stayed, and they haven't been before us screaming and hollering about not having a new school, and they've been very patient. And for us to now say we're going to take away one of those schools, I think it does them an injustice that I would not sit lightly with. And the fact that if we are going to build a new Alta Vista Linscott or Alta Vista whatever, or just a new Alta Vista if we go with a preschool, then these kids come back, so they will be moved twice. So I just think that we really have to think hard and long about taking away a school. And I know that there's a preschool, you know, we'd love to have preschool, but it's not mandatory yet. It's not something we have to do yet. And I don't think we have even a cost analysis that what it would cost to do this.
Well, there's changing buildings, then there's changing, like you go, well, I'm going to tear this building down, put them someplace else and come back. That cohort stays the same if you're doing that. I've seen a lot of districts do that. We need to move these kids over to this building for X amount of time while we're building the new one. They're not making new classmates or anything like that. It's the same group.
Yeah, but
They're
if we
changing
did,
buildings.
yeah, but if we did 3, 4, and 5 and closed the Linscott and sent those kids in one place to 2 different schools.
Right.
And then bring them back if we build a nice big Alta Vista school that we promised them that we were going to do. Then they would be brought back again, I would assume. That's just an assumption that I'm making.
Well, again, the challenge there is, this is a big problem in New England, is they traditionally build their schools on the same site as existing schools, because you got any land.
Right.
Okay? There's first I've heard of this is tearing down Alta Vista and rebuilding it. Any place you can move it up there, do it, because that's the worst place. That's the last place you want to be with a school. I would move it east or south out of there.
Yeah, we were going to build it right in that same spot because we
Yeah,
don't
that's
have the
problem.
property.
Problem's finding land for
Yeah,
that, though.
right.
And if you could find land, I kind of want to think about what they would charge you for it, so.
Yeah, it would be
But
crazy.
again, you have to at least do your due diligence and look at that, you know, because the only opportunity you have to change a school is when you rebuild it. Okay, I've seen many, districts sit there, well, it's the only place we've got, you have to do it, but if you can entertain it, move it.
And just
Because
for,
when it was built, there was a lot of kids up there, your distribution students were completely different. How old is that building, 70 years old,
69?
69?
Well, it was built in 1969.
69.
Oh, 69.
So 55.
55 years, yeah.
Oh, it's spring chicken then, so.
yeah.
See, my rule of thumb on that is I tell school districts, if a building's old enough to qualify for Social Security, it needs to be retired.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Because, see, Woburn is just a city that has been very much neighborhood schools, and kids stay together, and, change is hard, and I'm old and change is hard. But just for a fun fact, because I did talk to a real estate agent about the sale of homes and stuff, 185 homes were sold in a year in Woburn, single-family homes.
Right.
So
You need about 1,500.
yeah, so it's not happening in Woburn
Yeah.
because it's expensive to come here, and young families cannot afford to buy the homes here.
My fear is you're going to have all these aging baby boomers. Remember, the peak of the baby boom is 67 this year, and the front end is 78. Go forward 10 years, those numbers are 77 and 87. They're going to look around going, wow, how's market's going to get any better? I'm sitting on a ton of equity. I'm going to get out while the getting's good, and they're all going to dump their homes in the market at one time. You got about 16 million baby boomers in this country on a downsize right now. And we're going to go from a housing shortage to a housing glut here in about 5 years.
Except there's no place to go.
Huh?
There's no place to
There's
go.
no place to go.
No. So I don't know if they're going to be really doing that, because I'm one of those people, and there is no place to go.
Where do elderly people go when they have no place else to go? They move in with their kids.
Oh, God, no. Love them all.
My son
but no.
wanted to send me a forwarding address.
It's like Pat wants to move into the landscape.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
you can make that too. But
Maureen, I'm sorry, Pat, you're not
yeah.
done.
No,
I
if we could have with these plans, the number of staff reduction, if there would be any, would be
That's what's on here.
how many staff?
So we can go through, but that's the number of staff that would be required. It's plus that's the bubble room. So 102 plus 2, 5. So 4 from there.
So we'd only lose 4 teachers? Because that's an interesting thing that I wanted to have too. But,
I can walk through this in a minute.
okay. Okay. That's my little.
Thank you, Pat. I can always come back to you. This
Yeah.
is a subcommittee, so it's a free-for-all.
Can I
Maureen?
make just a couple of quick clarifications?
Of course.
I just want to make sure that this information was clear to people. Colleen, you asked the question about I believe it was the class sizes. And on page 5, it shows you with each of the options the breakdowns by grade. And I just want to make sure, I think this was clear, but I just want to make sure because it is important. The program students are figured into these numbers. So for example, if Rise is at the Shamrock, we hope to include our students to the extent that we can. So we're counting them in these numbers. So there may be some students that are only included for a short time of the day, but we're still holding a seat for all of our program students in the numbers. So that was the first point I wanted to make. The second is with respect to the early childhood and what we are required to do. So in the tiered focus monitoring, there is one area that we are not in compliance with that DESE will be issuing, and we will be working with them for some corrective actions, and it is the ratio of typical peers. And one of the suggestions that they have in terms of correcting this is considering the options of full-day preschool, because many families that want their children in preschool need to go to work and they need a full-day option. And so the only clarification that I want to make sure people understand is that for full-day preschool, you need the physical rooms, because currently our integrated sessions have a morning session and an afternoon session. So in order to have a full-day option, you would actually need the physical space. And the only options in this that would give you that ability, should the committee decide that's what they want, is to have an early childhood center at the Linscott, because that's the only option that would actually allow the extra rooms to split the sessions, if that's clear. So just a clarification.
what is the timeline on that for the tiered focus monitoring? When would they expect us to?
We are working with them, and we will have a plan to work with over the next year that will be watched, carefully. And, we will look at and work with them to, see what they can do to help us with solutions. The first thing that the Department of Education suggests is to look at full-day options, because it is what, most families would tell you is what they need or what they're looking for. But we will work through, what the different options are to be in compliance with that.
Thank you.
Andrew?
So, Dr. McKibben, one of the factors that sort of led us here is that in the district over the past year or so, we've actually seen a very significant increase in student population. So we've increased around 8% of our student population since September 1st. So I'm curious, because you're talking about a lot of the ways in which general trends nationwide and trends in Woburn are seeing declining populations. One of the things that we've had to think about is that 8% a sign of things to come? Are we looking at sort of a permanent shift in terms of Woburn settlement patterns? And I wondered if you might want to, if you could comment on that movement and how we can think about it sort of long term.
First question, how much did you lose during COVID?
Not in the end
About
that
9%.
much. I mean, we've been on a steady decline since 2013 or so. We're not back up to that level yet, but
The average school district in the U.S. lost between 3 and 8% of their students during COVID, not because they moved, but because they chose other educational options. Privates, charters, homeschool, virtual, okay? All those rates went up. Now they've all come back down, okay? So most school districts in the U.S. saw some kind of an increase. The bounce back rates have been all over the place. I've seen everything from all the way back to pre-COVID levels the next year to back declines, okay? Homeschool went down, charters went down, private schools, homeschool went down, all of them went down, but not back to pre-COVID levels. The wild card out there has been virtual, okay? And this varies from state to state because each state's virtual rules are the same. I like to say, before COVID, virtual was virtually nothing because no one had the infrastructure for it. Now everybody does, and it's gone back down. It'll never go back down to zero. Do not mistake the increases of the last year and a half for, quote, we call true growth. A good part of that was COVID return, okay? So you're back up to, pre-COVID levels. It's just like with the birth rates, the death rates. You see wild moves during COVID. What's the trend returning to now? Increasing death because of an aging population, dropping births because of a declining birth rate, and fewer women of childbearing age. So that it's also created kind of weird shaped cohorts in your age distribution because as first thing we do in a pop forecast is calculate your market share. How many kids go to the public schools versus the cohort size. It used to be running in the 90s. Now they're down in the 80s because the non-public options have gone. New England stayed up quite a bit better. Midwest, South just got killed. We just did a district out in Indiana. Only 60% of the kids that live in that district go to the public schools. The rest have picked other options because Indiana has a very, very liberal virtual law. So, don't mistake the last 8 years as, we're going to boom back here. It's not, if you'd had true 8% growth in enrollment, your home sales would have been about triple what they are right now. Your home construction would have been about triple, okay? It's not backed up in the census numbers either because I could see the size of your preschool cohorts coming and you're not even matching those. Okay. So that's COVID return, not true growth.
yeah, I mean, I guess my concern is what we've seen is a sort of a changing profile for our students in terms of that growth. It's been much more weighted towards low-income population, towards non-English speaking or English language learning populations. And so I guess my curiosity was whether or not that change might be predictive of a longer-term demographic shift in the city, which is something we have been sort of seeing for several years in terms of the growth of our low-income population, our ML population, and so on.
I think a bigger factor is going to be the raise, or the getting rid of the non-eviction rule.
Okay.
See how that's going to play out. That's, again, a more uniquely New England Northeast phenomenon. They don't have any trouble evicting people in the South. So here, there was a moratorium on that. So once that's lifted, and it's going to depend on how aggressively they follow that, that new ability to do that. I have no idea how it's going to happen. If they aggressively pursue that, well, then it could have a detrimental impact on your enrollment. But again, in the whole scheme of things, that's a secondary trend. The macro trends are against you. You're getting older, smaller household size, and only 25% of your households even have under 18 population.
Right.
Until something like that changes that, the analogy I use is for demography, it's a super tanker. Economy is like a speedboat, Jerome Powell can speak, doesn't speak, raise, it zips around all over the place. Demography is a super tanker. You spin the wheel, you might start turning 5 miles down the ocean. But once you start turning, you just can't whip that wheel back. There's a lot of demographic inertia in there.
Okay.
And aging and dropping household size are two really big demographic factors, and you can't change them. When I do my forecast for districts, what can you tell me about 10 years in the future? Well, if you're still living here, you're going to be 10 years older, okay? Which sounds kind of stupid, except that if you're 35 right now and you'll be 45 10 years from now, I got a pretty good idea that you're about 95% sure you're not going to have any more kids, okay? If you go on from 45 to 55, good 90% chance you're going to be an empty nester. And that's the demographic variable that shocked people from the 2020 census, was the drop in household size. Think about it for a second. Traditional two-parent household, mom, dad, whatever the point is kids. So when you see a drop in household size, it disproportionately affects your under 18 population. Even the U.S. went down 0.03, which doesn't sound like a lot to you. Multiply it by 115 million households. Let me give you my favorite stat from the 2020 census, okay? 7.3% growth rate. Second slowest in U.S. history, second slowest since 1930. But that's still a 22 million person increase. Pretty healthy. During the same decade, the under 18 population dropped by 1 million. And why? Because births been dropping for 15 years. And they cut off foreign immigration, which accounts for half the population growth in the U.S. since 1990. Okay? So this is not just a Woburn issue, a Massachusetts issue, a New England issue. It's going on all over the country to varying degrees. Okay? And those are awful hard trends to fight against, because most of your migrants come from Boston.
Thank you. I appreciate the. Of course, this is now. My questions just vanished because my tablet is
Well, I can
restarted.
come back to you.
Well, I
wait. Oh.
do remember the next one at least. And so, one of the sort of connected with that issue, looking at our free and reduced lunch percentage, and our current distribution is, it's not wildly skewed, but we do have a couple of schools, the Shamrock, Malcolm White, the Alta Vista, which have a somewhat significantly higher than district average rate of students on free and reduced lunch. In some of these cases, we are seeing an increase in those numbers. So, if, for example, option 2, the Shamrock, stays around the same, Alta Vista increases a little bit. We see an increase at the Shamrock in option 3, and especially in option 4. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you can sort of comment on what some of the factors involved in that are, and what the benefit is of looking to try to bring those more in line with a district average.
Well, the first thing is that when each option, you've got different capacity numbers, again, based on where the programs are at. And that kind of forces your hand right there, okay? If you here's the geographic area, here's the distribution of students, where it is right now, and we change the capacity of the school, it's either going to have to either contract an area or expand an area to get it close to that optimum 85%, 80%. So that's why you're seeing so much variation between each one of the options here. Now, can I make it perfectly 85%? Sure, I could. Draw it in there. Might be cockamamie lines, go right through an apartment complex or a neighborhood or something like that, or use some side street as a boundary. I can make these numbers sit up and sing Melancholy Baby if I want to, but they, you know,
Sing
it may be the
Melancholy
most
Baby.
ridiculous looking
Make
boundary
sure that's
in
in
the
the
world. I probably just aged myself horribly with that comment, didn't I?
So I
I
appreciate
got you, though.
So, you know, again, well, here's a parameter, we don't want to split neighborhoods, you know, we make mindful of transportation. So you're going to get these variations in here. And again, it goes back to that point. You got to be utilitarian on this, okay? What am I willing to give up to achieve this goal? And you're balancing literally 10 to 15 different variables. So you've got to make some of them the most important. I used to say you used to make them Trump, but you can't say that anymore now. But
Sure you can.
you know, building capacity, program distribution, two of the big ones. What's your future trends going to be? Okay. Transportation might be the second one. Moving fewest kids might be right behind that. You're going to have to prioritize this, okay? Because all these issues are important, okay? You just have to prioritize which ones are more important, which ones you're going to give ground on, okay? That's why they pay you the big bucks to be on this committee, is making
Oh,
hard
yeah.
decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. That's written
Courtney,
there.
did you have something?
I-
So I just want to clarify this sheet when you were ready. I don't need to go. I just,
No.
because I just
Yeah.
want to clarify.
No,
this
thank
sheet.
you.
But I can go after.
I just one quick,
Yeah.
I mean,
Sure.
maybe not quick. But, so you talked about some of these options are better long-term, these will last us 10, 15 years. Which of these options do you see as the greatest risk of coming back at us? And which of these options do you see as the greatest risk of us having to revisit in 2 or 3 years?
2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
That's from my perspective.
Okay. So for you, 1 and 5 are the two
1 and 5.
that have the longest lasting.
If you're going to go to the preschool center, go with 5. If you're not, go with 1.
Okay.
Okay. But again, that's I don't have to live here.
Right.
You know? So I'm purely cold-blooded, machine-like, cyberon, whatever term you want to use. You know, Cylon demographer. You know, that's how I look at things.
But I mean, I appreciate the perspective. I mean,
Yeah.
you've done this a lot, and you've seen where the things are that can go sideways. So I appreciate that perspective.
Yeah. See, I can see that they don't have to like me; they have to like you. You know.
Yeah, I
so.
know. That's not true either.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not doing great on that regard, but it's fine.
Yeah, like option 2 is interesting to me because it moves the whole pre-K to the Reeves. But then it adds a chunk to the Earl Wyman. So that makes me, as Pat would say, makes me nervous because we're changing the utilization of the Earl Wyman from 81 to 87, and that's a really fast-growing school. So those are my thoughts. I have
Not
absolutely
right.
no question.
Not in the future, it won't be.
Right, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted, that's my next question is, so when you're making these predictions, you actually have studied and predicted for us scientifically each school's growth,
Like
right?
the
So,
school by school numbers.
yeah,
You bring those up, Matt. Enrollment by school. So I put those in there. Okay, Wyman. This is current. Why? Where do we go here?
Earl Wyman.
Yeah. You're gonna pop next year because you're gonna get a 56 cohort coming out.
yeah,
Probably close to 70 coming in.
yeah,
But within 3 years, these 70 cohorts are going out. You won't have 70 size cohorts coming back in.
okay.
okay?
Interesting.
So you got to play chicken a little bit with this, you know. It says,
Yeah.
we got a 1, 2, 3 year little wave going through. It's going to be tough. We'll be close to 81, 85, 88, 90%. That's why you want to have that spare room hanging around out there so you
Yeah.
can handle that larger cohort 1 or 2 years.
Right.
But you sure don't want to go build, we got to build 6 extra classrooms on there to handle this wave. No, it's 3-year abnormality. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Because we already know the cohorts coming behind are smaller.
The realm, I don't know, the district for option 2 just seems a little, like kids will be on the bus for a while.
Yeah. Pack lunches.
Okay, those are my only thoughts, at this point. Are we ready for Courtney?
Can I just ask one other quick question?
Yeah, of course.
Thanks
you
so
can,
much.
Andy.
I don't get to ask these anymore.
I know, no,
I'm
that's right.
excited about it.
Go.
So just out of curiosity, in terms of our current schools, which ones might be either gaining population the fastest or losing it the slowest? And which ones do we see as more likely
I would
to sort
have
of
to
long-term
do a
decline?
full in-depth population forecast and all that, which we do for a lot of districts, because when we do it, we don't use cohort survival like NESDEC does. We do a full population forecast, build a fertility, mortality, migration model for each area, do 0 to 4 to 85 plus. It's a whole other involved process. Those results drive your enrollment forecast. So it's your current future demographic dynamics, not your past trends.
Okay.
We looked at it, but we didn't calculate a full forecast for it.
Okay.
When you do that, do you look at renting and owning as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
That
okay.
is a key variable. Under you, they have 2 different complete dynamics. One of the big ones is renters move an average every 3 years.
Right.
Owners move an average every 15 years. Age structure, there's kids per school or household, there's school-age kids per household, 2 different numbers. Huge difference in rentals, much less in homeowners. So yes, that's a very key variable. Age of homeowners is a key one also.
Sorry, I just was here. The renters, when you looked at that age group, did you find that to be younger or older? And did you factor out
This is New
kids
England,
too?
you know, where there's no such thing as affordable housing. So your renters tend to stay longer and have, usually in most places in the country, by the time the oldest one is 5, 6 years old, they don't want to raise a kid in an apartment. They're moving to the, house in the suburbs someplace else. Can't do that up here. They tend to stay longer. They tend to go in elementary, some high school, because they don't have the economic resources to move to a home, even if they want to stay in the same area. So the dynamics in the Commonwealth, and even all of New England, are a lot different than the national trends, which is why you don't want to use national trends. Said that, they still follow basic rules. You don't come out of college and buy a house, you rent an apartment. That's what we call family formation areas. So they tend to be loaded up with preschoolers, but you are going to see a lot of them try to get out single-family attached homes. Maybe not Woburn, maybe someplace else. When we moved up here, we started looking in Lexington. We wound up in Gardner before we could afford anything, So, it depends on how far you want to drive. The migration decision-making home buying process is very, very complex. Schools is only one of them. Commute to work for the person, the spouse, their commute versus where the kids are going to school at, home price, taxes. There's a lot of things in there. So it's a very complex decision. But they will stay longer here in New England. You have quite a bit of rental property here, but you still have people that are moving out to as far as New Hampshire, Maine, because that's where they can afford houses at.
Really great question.
Oh, of course, James.
In the past, we talked about moving special education programs. Have you considered one location for both special education programs and the early childhood center? Has that been considered? I know it's kind of random, but
Yeah, so it would be very difficult because when we have students that are in the special education programs, we try to integrate them into grades with typical peers. So for example, if you have the RISE program, you need to have a K through 5 general education cohort to give them that space to go into. So that's why that would be difficult. I think that in the way that the schools are today, currently, we've got some classes at the Shamrock, and we've got quite a few at the Reeves. So currently, we do have preschool that are across 2 elementary buildings where there are K to 5 peers. That's the current model.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you for coming back to me, Ms. Crowley. Again, we opened tonight's meeting with, Dr. Crowley commenting how we began this when Commerce Way wasn't in existence. Now Commerce Way is in existence, and there's tons of apartments being built. I appreciate the doctor's real estate lesson, but as you go down Commerce Way, there's more and more apartment buildings going up. New Boston Street, the old Independent Tallow, more construction, more apartments going up in there, which will be affecting, as we're speaking, the North Woburn District, whatever you want to call it. The real estate costs, people are going to stay in those apartments longer than they used to because they have to. They really have to. As well as one of our apartments right now is used as a shelter. Those students are being educated in our district. Again, no control by the city, but they are educating those students each and every day. That could change. The poor mayor could get a notification tomorrow that, from the state, say, oh, we're going to move them someplace else, Mr. Mayor. We don't know any of those factors. But I think, the fact that New Boston, Commerce Way, all across these apartments are being built, they have to be factored in again, to Mrs. Chisholm's point about the North Woburn District. And I know you're going to meet next week with the citywide building task force, and hopefully during your agenda, including in those meetings, is where we are with the MSBA in cooperation with your group, Ms. Crowley, to, the next steps towards MSBA. Again, to your point, Doctor, they're not going to build the school next year, but if it's, a statement of interest is produced and directed and sent to the MSBA, at least we're back in the pipeline with new building or new construction. So, again, it's just factors that come up my head, Ellen. I'm sorry if it's random, but it's just things that come up, during these presentations tonight. So I appreciate your time.
That's
Thank
okay.
you.
The committee is looking at this for the first time, so it's,
And
Yeah.
let me close on this point.
sure.
Bring up a good point, sir, in the building and all that, not only for the schools, but anybody know how many households you got in Woburn? Want to guess?
Households,
15,000?
single family, double
About
family?
40,000 population, how many households you
Yeah,
got?
how many? That's a
About
good question.
16,000,
Yeah.
okay? What's it take to change your population trajectory? 16,000? We're talking about maybe 800 to 900 a year, okay? Goes back to our home sales discussion we were having earlier. You're not running that now, you need about 1,200 going. When you're looking at buildings, home sales plus building, that number needs to be close to 1,500 to really start changing the number, or the trajectory of the district. If you're not making that number, it ain't not going to do it, folks. One of your neighbors down the road, who will remain unnamed at this time, so I don't embarrass them publicly, are going all gaga about the 45 new apartments going to be built in our school district. That 22,000 housing units, 45 apartments, not even going to, that's rounding error. That's not going to move the needle at all. You think it would be, they're all going to come in and have like 9 kids or something. It's just ridiculous. But it takes a lot to move that super tanker in the direction. A whole lot. I don't think people realize how much. I see a new family on the street. That's good. That's a start. If I may ask one question to the public. How many of you have kids in the public Woburn School District? How many are going to have any more kids? Right there, folks. And on that, I will leave you to your task.
Okay, so we're almost ready to close unless there's any more questions. I'll let Courtney speak.
Oh, sure.
Clarify.
So I explained it to Pat, and I didn't explain it to the rest of the room. I just wanted to explain, because there was a question regarding reduction in force, and there was a question regarding
Yes.
transportation.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to answer it publicly, because Pat heard me, but no one else at the table. So when looking at option one, what you'll see at the bottom, so we currently have 109 elementary classrooms. And again, this is with us counting our best estimate of bubble rooms capacity. So it could fluctuate, plus or minus, 1 or 2. But if we're looking at 109 current classrooms, option one would have us set at 102 classrooms plus 3 bubble rooms, so 105 rooms, so a reduction in force of 4. Option 2 would have capacity 102 classrooms plus 2 bubble rooms, reduction in force of 5. Option 3 would have capacity of 96 classrooms, 4 bubble rooms, that's 9. Option 4 is 102 with 2 bubble rooms is 5. Option 3 is 102. We have it as 2. This is the only one that is a little bit more questionable, could maybe only be 1. So that would be between 5 and 6. The number at the bottom is an estimated value of reduction in force based off of lowest salary, which again, this is estimate values, not set. And then the last bucket, we sat with principals and went over an estimate of transportation. Option 1 would be, again, as an estimate, the transportation would stay the same. And then in options 2, 3, 4, and 5, you'll see that we've set increase. What it is that based off of movement, typically one building goes down in a bus and then another building goes up in a bus, right? And so it's a delta of probably 1 bus, at most maybe 2. None of them were like staggering this as like a 5-bus ad. And most of them meant that someone was going down and someone was going up. The big swing was when you went to the 2 versions of 24 classrooms at the Reeves, was when the swing would probably be more transportation. It's just a lot more kids that were getting to the west side. Thank you. I just want to make sure everyone had that for me.
Thank you. All right, is there any more, anything from the committee? Jesse, Mike?
I did have one more thought.
Yes, Jesse.
In regards to option 5, or really any of the ones that have the landscape, but specifically 5, not that I agree with any of them, just stating a question. If we were to have a full-time preschool, so we can have more typical peers at the preschool, do we have a number on, if we could meet those numbers? Or, because I see all these other early childhood programs opening in the city, specifically one behind the Reeves. So do we know if we could meet that number for the city if we were to open the school, or how that would work? It's really hypothetical, but.
Yeah, so if the committee elected to go in the direction of changing the landscape to an early childhood center, you would have the physical rooms. You would not have the staff. You would have the space so that you could open classrooms should you decide that you wanted to staff the classrooms with the appropriate teacher and support staff.
You would probably phase it.
Okay, phase, like a classroom to, okay.
Instead of going and finding out, you probably phase out.
Got it. Okay, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Now, did resources want to take any action, make any recommendations, or are we just gonna, I know you just got this today, right, in the morning. So is it our consensus that we'll just bring this to the full committee without any recommendations? Mike or Jesse?
I'm leaning towards bringing the full thing to the committee,
Yeah.
having more time to digest it, allowing the public more time to digest it as well. I'd love to hear the public's feedback on it as well.
Right.
And I think the whole committee sort of needs some time. It's a lot. It was a great presentation, so thank you. But it's certainly a lot to consider.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mike?
Same as Ms. Wetzel, I think we, at this point, great presentation by the doctor and all involved getting these to us this evening. So I think if it'd be a good time now to entertain a motion that would take it under advisement and bring it up at an upcoming school committee meeting.
Okay. I have that motion. Jesse?
I second that motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. So we'll just bring this to the committee without any recommendations for full discussion. Dr. McKibben, thank you so much for your presentation. You seem to hit all the elements of the school committee's rubric, talking about looking at diversity, programs, class sizes, or I guess what we would call utilization of buildings. So thank you. It was a tremendous amount of work in a short period of time. We're very grateful for the work that you've done, and especially Maureen and Courtney and Dr. Crowley as well. for all the work that you clearly did to back up the data that was in here. This couldn't have been done without you. So we're very appreciative. This is a huge change for the Woburn Public Schools, but now I think the committee has enough information to go forward. And I want to thank all the members that are not the members of the Resources Subcommittee for coming tonight and being here. Is there anything else before we?
I just have maybe something for people to think about before we do our budget final thing on Monday night. There's not a cut here for $500,000. So we may need to adjust the amount of money that we took out for redistricting and adjust it accordingly. Because I just don't want to sell ourselves short.
Based on the option that we choose.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Just a fun fact for Monday.
Thanks, Pat, for always talking about finance.
The almighty buck.
All right, I guess we will adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn, Mr. Chairman?
Second.
Yeah, we'll adjourn.
Okay.
I don't know if we make motions.
Dr. McKibben, thank you.